The outline for a self-help book is very similar to most nonfiction or business, where the first chapter starts with the introduction is essentially your story. Your introduction to self-help. Chapter 1 is the big problem. Chapter 2 is make the problem even worse. Chapter 3, bad solutions. Chapter 4, solution. No, still bad. Chapter 6, chapter 5, my solution. This one called UVP or unique mechanism, which is your method, essentially. Then essentially the length of the book is after this is going to depend upon chapter 6, proof of solution, chapter 7, answer objections with more stories. And then essentially it's like chapter 8 and beyond is steps, and then conclusion is wrapping it all together. So this could be chapter 9 through 40, or it's just like each individual step. And then each individual step usually can be divided into the same meta, where it's like a problem and the solution for that specific step, proof, how to, and then there's inspiration. Inspiration essentially is like the end, you can do it. And you kind of repeat that over and over and over again for every single step. You're kind of like introducing, this is the problem, these are all the bad solutions, this is how and then each chapter, this pretty much applies to every nonfiction story. Then there's a thesis or lesson of the story. Then there's what's called nuts and bolts, which is often like proving it. And then there's a recall back to the story. And then there's inspiration. And this is kind of like how, but then there's usually the cliffhanger, which is now that we learned this, now we need to learn this, which is the next chapter. And so a lot of people go back and forth between memoir and self-help. And that's because the story for every chapter, a lot of the times the stories are stories from your own life. And also the inspiration is often from your own life as well. And even sometimes the proof, the nuts and bolts, is anecdotal stories from your own life. So the reason why self-help a lot of times is like you think of like Mel Robbins or like Lewis Howes or a lot of the big guys, Tony Robbins even, where it feels like half memoir. It's because a lot of the stories that they're using in every chapter, it doesn't have to be every story, but a lot of their chapters happen to be from their own life. So it shouldn't only be for your own life. There should be stories of your clients or people you've worked with or people that have used the same system or the same theory or anything like that. This is a fractal. This is like what the chapter is going to look like. And this is what the book is going to look like. And then there's different subgenres of self-help. A lot of people think that self-help is like its own thing, but there's like personal development, productivity. Productivity is atomic habits. And there's wellness and mindfulness. I wouldn't say spiritual because spiritual is kind of its own category, but wellness, mindfulness, and then there's usually relationships and then career. I wouldn't put money really in self-help. Some people put money, but it doesn't really matter. It's however you name it. But usually this is not business. Entrepreneurship or something like that is not really self-help unless it's a mindset that's necessary for it. But these are like major subgenres of self-help. What's interesting about self-help is when you're deciding about doing the self-help book, this is really important. And I'm an optimist, probably to a delusional point. You have to be an entrepreneur. You have to like create things that don't exist in the world. But I also want you guys to be honest with yourself, because self-help, it gets a really bad rap. I think it gets a really bad rap for a good reason. And the reason is that a lot of people, and if this resonates with you, that's fine. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But a lot of people that get into self-help or want to write something that's self-help are the same people that want to get into coaching. I love it. You can find someone that can help you in a particular problem, then we love it. It's kind of funny. One of our lead engineers at Kafka doesn't have a college degree in computer engineering, but he's better than all of the guys that have like NC degrees. Hiring in Silicon Valley, I've never heard anyone ask for someone's university degree or anything like that. They just don't care. It doesn't matter. Can you do it or can you not do it? It just absolutely doesn't matter. Who your family is, where you're from. I cannot explain how little I care. I barely even read resumes anymore. Honestly, most of the time I don't read resumes when I'm hiring. I just give them an assignment. Here's an assignment. And I usually pay them for the assignment. I'll say, hey, I'll pay you whatever for this assignment. And if you're good, then you can go on, and I won't even interview them unless they can just do the thing, because I don't care. Anyways, I'm getting off on a sidetrack, but this does relate. So in self-help, the idea is, whether it's through self-development or career or mindfulness or whatever genre, relationships, you in theory are embodying a mentor. We've talked about this in basic hero's journey. There's a little person and they're in their normal world. There's this little person. And then there's an inciting incident and says, oh, wow, I have to go into a new world. And as soon as they get the call to adventure, this is the hero's journey. But my point is that you have to call to adventure and then you resist it and then you go towards it and you're in the new world. And what happens as soon as you're in the new world? This is repeated a million times in every story ever. And in every genre is there's a mentor, and then the mentor gives you some advice, and then you go through a series of trials that are difficult, some kind of like ups and downs. And it's like a video game, and you go through the ups and downs. Just kind of write a real quick visual of the hero's journey, right? And then you learn something, and you beat the bad guy at the end, and up and down, up and down, up and down, you beat the bad guy, and then the climax with the bad guy, or the bad guy could be internal, it could be your own demons or whatever it may be, right? And then you learn something, or you get something, learn, or get something, and then you go back to your home, and now you're stronger, and you help everyone. It's like a hero's journey. It's pretty easy. And the self-help thing is you are the mentor. Now, does the mentor have to be perfect? No, I'm not like saying that the mentor has to be perfect. But the mentor does kind of have to have their shit together to an extent. They have to be not a basket case. They can't be not able to do like basic things. Now, if you are wanting to be a coach, you want to write a self-help book because that's what you want and that's the meaning of your life, go ahead and do it. I love it. But if things aren't smooth for you and you're not really world class at whatever the thing is that you're doing, it often will it'll ring a little hollow. Watch YouTube and learn yourself and then do it. You're either going to pay with time or money, right? And the concept is that these things that hold you back from writing the great novel or writing science fiction or writing your memoir, those are all valid and they're great. And welcome to being an artist and stop making excuses and you can do it. And you have to do it if you're writing self-help. If you want to be a coach, you got to be disciplined. These are such basic values and habits of people that are successful in anything. Find your mentors, meaning like be mindful of who you take advice from. And if they're not one of the best in the world at the thing, it doesn't matter what they think, honestly. Unless they're like close family. And even then, even if they're close family, have you ever done what I'm trying to do? No? Okay, well. And even people that have done it before, honestly, you should be wary because the arena changes so quickly. What worked 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago might not work today. Now, of course, first principles are always there, but I want to challenge you. If you're thinking about writing a self-help book and it's like taking you a really long time, and if it's taking you a really long time because it's like your piece de resistance and you're like reinventing psychology or be self-aware, if you're trying to be a coach or like teach someone something, you got to be someone that's worthy of teaching people. That's the hard truth about self-help. And that's why self-help gets a bad rap, is because you have people who are coaches or you have their programs or they have their self-help book, and then they're kind of chaos themselves. Now, if you say, this is part of my journey, I'm going to figure it out by writing this book, then that's fine too. That's amazing. Obviously, be self-aware, but also be self-aware that it's taking you too long to write a self-help book. Should you be writing a self-help book or should you get your act together? That's the rub about self-development and self-help. Let it be inspiring. The truth is the truth. We are what we do, not what we want, not what we dream, not what we desire, not what we think, not what we talk about. We are what we do. Self-help is cool. Self-help is also a beginner's approach, to be honest. It's kind of niche. Something that's self-help. Self-help is not how to go on great dates to like spark the fire with your husband or your wife if you're living in Miami. That's a great book. But that's not a self-help book. That's a how-to book. Self-help is generally some big idea that either is an old idea that's re-articulated in a way that makes people think about it differently. Think about like Mel Robbins, a 5-second rule, or 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, or How to Win Friends and Influence People. The One Thing, all of Ryan Holiday, or even Marcus Aurelius. That was just his journals. He didn't realize he was doing a self-help book. But the concept is that if it's universal and kind of applies to everyone, and it's almost by default non-specific, which means that by default, it's actually deeper. Because if something applies to everyone, it's human psychology, or it's the nature of reality, or it's philosophy, or something really intense, right? Don't let people snark at self-help. The best self-help is really like first principles psychology or sociology or human nature, how we connect with each other. And so you got to ask yourself, am I saying something that's brand new? Do I have a new system? And then do I have a name for that system, a name for that thesis, a name for that idea? There's some big thing. What is that thing that only I have? And then if you don't have, it. That's okay. But you kind of keep tweaking it until it's really unique. Hey, I'm going to start my pizza store. That's fine. There's a lot of pizza stores, but you should have something that's different about your pizza store. Even if it's somewhat generic, there should be something about you. And it could be how you write it. It could be your tone of voice. It could be your style. It could be your sentence structure. It could be the great stories you tell. It could be cross-pollinating different genres. It could be just the name. The name is so catchy, whatever your system is. It could be that it's step by step. But there's got to be something, there's a reason why this exists. Every self-help book is going to have a story every chapter. You were going, like, imagine you want to be a director. You want to be a big director in Hollywood, and you're going to film school. The way that you would watch a movie or watch a television show is very different than a consumer. See The Matrix? When you're seeing The Matrix, remember from that movie, you like see the behind what was happening, the code behind it. You have to do the same thing when you're reading. Everything that you read, you want to not read it as a consumer, as someone, because you're authors. You don't have the privilege of just like turning off your brain and being like, oh, Dune is really pretty. Oh, like Superman, this was fun. Like, oh, I just watched this movie. If you want to be a director, you got to be mentally taking notes. How did the camera go there? And why did they choose that? And the sound design. And I wonder how expensive the set was. And I wonder how many people were on stage. And what was the sound, what were the sound effects? And did they edit? You're essentially seeing behind the scenes of whatever's happening. And so the same thing happens with books. When you're reading as an author, don't just read it mindlessly. Even if you have to read every chapter 2 times, I analyze and I often rewrite the copywriting on billboards and I rewrite copy. Like my point is, it's the same thing. Imagine you were a chef, right? A chef cannot just go to a restaurant. It's very difficult for a chef to go to a restaurant and just be like, oh yeah, I'm just eating. Oh, you're a chef. What is this? Is this garlic? And is this a little bit of acid here? It's like default, especially if you're going to be a professional. And so anyways, this is a long tangent here, but you'll notice if you start noticing the pattern of self-help or you start noticing the pattern of the books that you're reading, you'll notice that every single chapter of every self-help book in the world that you've ever read starts with a story. So whenever you're thinking, can I combine this story or that story, or this story, or that story? Of course, it's just the introduction because we learn through allegory. For me, I see the architecture of it more than the story. Sometimes I'm not great at storytelling, and it's something that I'm at least aware of and I'm learning and working on. I know the structures of story, but I don't often do it normally when I'm teaching. That is the way that all self-help books are written. You have something that you want to teach. Think about it this way. Every chapter, you have something that you want to teach. You have a big idea, and then you have the mini lesson. All this is step by step. And each one of these mini lessons, you have a one-sentence version of it. Did you teach this lesson? Oh, yeah, you need to make sure that when you're doing copywriting, you use you instead of I. That's the lesson, essentially. One sentence, like a tweet. Could you teach this whole chapter in a tweet? Probably. Or you should be able to. And then can you do it in a paragraph? Okay, great. But do you really want to do that? No. What's the best way to teach it? The best way to teach it is probably with a story because people remember stories. And then they say, oh, but I call bullshit. What's the point here? And then you say, no. Like, here's the thesis. Like, here's the lesson. Think about children's books, like a story. And then, oh, by the way, this is the lesson of the children's book. That was just one example. That's an anecdote. And a story is an anecdote. And then you have like proof, science, case studies. So you're essentially answering their objection. Like, does this really work? A lot of people call this the nuts and bolts. And then you have the step by step, which doesn't have to be boring. It can just be like to do. What's the action item here? Cool. I learned this lesson. The proof is there, but like, make this actionable. What am I going to actually do here? And then at the end, by the way, everyone's biggest objection is I'm a snowflake and you don't understand me and my life is more difficult than everyone else's. That's everyone's final objection to anything, their own mind and their own limiting beliefs. You have to do that. But my point is that you start with a lesson. What am I teaching here? And then you say, oh, okay, I'm basically teaching this in one sentence. And then it's like, yeah, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's kind of like this and kind of like this. And you got to make sure you do this and like, don't ever do that. Okay, cool. We have the paragraph form. And then you say, okay, well, how am I going to teach this thing? You've got to come up with a story for every chapter. And it could be a story from history. It could be a story from a business. It could be a story from your life. It could be a story of someone that you read about. It could be a fictional character. It could be a made up story. It could be a hypothetical story. Imagine a girl that blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's just something that connects that they're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. This could be a love story. You essentially have to be like, it's a fractal. You have a million little mini stories you have to tell all the time in self-help. And I mean, think about history. History book is the same way, essentially. History book is just a series of stories. Biographies, you want to know what a biography is? They're just like failures. This problem happened, and then this failure, and then this problem, and then this problem, and then this failure. And it's just like this perpetual failure. But then overcoming it, essentially. That every single biography is just a series of mini failures. Kind of shorter, they're longer than short stories, they're longer than novellas. They're usually about the same length as like teenage young adult fiction. They're usually like larger font, maybe 200 or 300 pages. But if they were written, if they're typesetting, the spacing between the letters is smaller and the actual font is like 11-point font, then a lot of self-help books would probably be like 150 pages long, but they have larger spacing and larger font. Like the Four Agreements or Cartole, those are a little bit shorter. But short, long, whatever you have to do to get it. Some of my favorite books are like 90 pages. Like The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway is less than 100 pages. Infinite Jests by David Foster Wallace is over 1,000. And those are two of my favorite books. They're written totally different styles and different ways. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about length. What you should worry about is are you teaching what you need to teach? There's no obvious right answer. It's a spy action adventure. But there's always a romance. And so is it a romance? Is it action? It's action. My point is like, self-help is usually not generic, but general. I'll give you the difference. Like how to find love and peace or something. Like that kind of book, like that's self-help. If it's how to get over the trauma of your corporate boss, that's more how to, because it's more specific. It's really like the broadness of it is what defines self-help. And so if you notice like career development, like who doesn't need career development? It's a subgenre of self-help because it's like everyone. It just means like kind of the soft skills that are necessary. This is how you rewrite your resume to get a job is not self-help, but discipline and communication and believing in yourself and working hard, taking care of your health, that kind of stuff for career development, the soft skills. A true story usually resonates because it answers. So if you think about this, you're essentially saying, hey, here's this thing that you need to learn. This is the psychology of what's happening. And then you say, well, yeah, okay, great. But like you just make it obvious for me what's going on. Here's the point. Here's the lesson. But that's an anecdote. Like, is this really true? Does this actually work? Or is this like fluffy, you just made it up, right? Now, you can have a made-up story as your main story, for sure. And then you can use logic. Think about philosophy. Philosophy is essentially a series of thought experiments. When you read philosophy, all the great philosophy books, they're not real examples, except for political philosophy. Often we'll use real examples. But ethics or epistemology, for example, it's all hypothetical. That's the whole point of philosophy. Let's put this in this thought experiment. Like, what if this happened? What if this happened? And you're using logic to kind of prove it with logic. It probably shouldn't be a philosophy book. I'm not saying go dry, but you make your case. Put the left side of your brain on for a second there and make your case. Here's my point. It's easier to make your case if the story is true and therefore the data from the story is like evidence of itself. Whatever is the best story is what you should use, honestly. And you can go back and forth. You can have five of the chapters can be hypothetical. Imagine a world where blah, blah, blah. Like think of like the E-Myth. E stands for entrepreneur. It's actually interesting. And now stands for like email. So you think of internet, but it's such an old book that actually stands for entrepreneur. But the idea is he talks about this baker. It's a total made up story. The Richest Man in Babylon is like a story. The Four Agreements are made up stories. So these are some of the best selling self-help books. If you go back to the story that you're going to tell, there was this human who wanted this thing, but they had a problem and they didn't know how to overcome the problem. And then they had a series of little mini trials and then they learned something and then they figured out, and then they found the solution. And so then the inspiration is, that person's kind of like me, or I have the same problems, or I've thought that way as well. And so the inspiration and the problem is sort of built into the structure of any story. And then the inspiration, the reason why I always say inspiration at the end is essentially this is a little bit more advanced, but this is often like third person. You're telling the story in third person. Like he did this, she did this, they did this. Right? You might switch into first person in the middle of the chapter. And in the end of the chapter, you can often switch into second person. This could be first person if it's a story from your life, or if it's a story that you know. But usually the chapter will start out in third person, kind of transition to your voice, first person. And then in the end, when I mean inspiration, is you're talking directly to them. Now that we talked about this, are you ready? And I know you're worried about this, and I know that you think, but you can do it. And then you got to inspire them into that mini lesson. The Richest Man in Babylon is a fable, though. The Richest Man in Babylon is not written like a traditional self-help book, right? It's a fable. So it's a different literary technique. He doesn't have like fable. It's like The Alchemist. Is The Alchemist like a narrative or is it self-help? It's a fable. It might be in the self-help category. Like I probably would put it in there, but it's really a fable. Self-help is pretty self-explanatory, honestly. The big idea here is you need your own big idea. You need to name it. Just like in business, you need to have a unique value proposition. You need to have your unique, it's called a unique mechanism in book writing. And if you don't have your 7 steps or your method or your way of approaching it, then you got to figure it out. And if you don't have something that's unique, then the book probably doesn't need to exist. And just write something that's more fun or fiction or business. Or if you are determined to write self-help, you got to get in the arena, because don't be a mentor and then not have a basic discipline. The structure is pretty simple. Here's the structure. Right? Your introduction is kind of your personal story. Why is this relevant? The big problem, make the problem even worse, which is essentially more stories about why the problem is bad. And then here's a bunch of solutions that don't work. And then here's even some more bad solutions that don't work. And then my solution is amazing. And then here's the proof that it works. And then here's, by the way, I know you're thinking that this doesn't work, but it does work. And then here's how you actually do it. Think about it this way. Let's say if I was writing a book about writing a self-help book. So I would say, oh, hey, I'm Jonathon, and that would be my introduction. And these are my companies, and this is why you should listen to me. So there's this really big problem is that everyone has something really important to say. I'm telling you the book. Everyone has really something important to say, and they live through something unique and can help other people. And the problem, though, is that a lot of people don't really know how to articulate what they've learned to help other people in a way. And so a lot of times people struggle with their lives because they don't believe in themselves and they're not even aware of all the good stuff that they can do. That's a massive problem. But here's the second. That's not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that it doesn't just affect them. It also affects everyone in their life. ... Chapter 2. And so then chapter 2, make the problem even bigger. The problem isn't just that people can't articulate it for themselves. The problem is because they can't write a self-help book, they're not able to monetize, they're not able to make more money, they're not able to live into their passion. So then that hurts their family, it hurts their relationships. And I could go into that chapter. Here's an example of something that's tried. And you might feel like this, and there's another person that did this, and it ruined everything. Right? That's obviously bad. So what are we going to do? Well, I'll tell you this. This is kind of a subgenre of, it's kind of a cross between self-help and business. And for every rule, there's going to be an exception. Right? I think that's it for me. Appreciate you guys as always. Cheers, guys.